also add, though, it's very important to note the extensive monitoring that's taking place. We did 3 subsurface tests before we even began subsurface injection. We also did there's a SMART protocol that was ongoing for the surface dispersant. So I think it's important to understand how much care and time is taken and how much transparency. The information is being provided to everyone, that we are getting very good data from the use of dispersants. But more importantly, when you start to talk about plumes, I think if I could just assure everyone that not only NOAA and the EPA, but many agencies are being brought together, and there is going to be extensive science. We have 3 areas particularly that we're very focused on right now. First of all, it's the safety of seafood and seafood sampling, so that we can open up fisheries. The National Marine Fisheries Service has closed some fisheries until we can, as a caution, to make sure we can test and see what impact this oil spill has had on the fishery. The state of Louisiana has done the same thing. These are vital fisheries, both for commercial and recreational fisheries. The other point is NOAA vessels coming to really study this, the impact that all this activity has had on this wonderful ecosystem, and to make sure we continue to study and provide information to everyone about what the impact this oil has had, what the impact dispersants have had on this important marine ecosystem. And then finally, the constant air and water quality monitoring that we must do while you're engaged in operations with volatiles and a high heat index and everything. So we're doing that as well. It's my understanding there were 2 vessels. One, the fishing vessel Weatherbird. 2 is on it's a Florida vessel contracted by NOAA that's returning from its mission tomorrow. So we're going to be able to look at the results and work with them collaboratively to analyze whatever information they found. And then we know there's also the Gordon Gunter, the ship that's departing Pascagoula. So those are just 2. We have several other research vessels that are coming, and I know NOAA is doing its own, or BP, excuse me, is doing its own research. So there's going to be extensive research and analysis of what's going on, and that will be shared with everyone.
I can add just one more point. In fact, the data from our monitoring program is actually on the internet. You can go look at the results from that data. I think you'll actually see that in 3 specific areas. I think the first 5 monitoring trips from the monitoring vessel are posted. First thing is that the oil in water measurements are very low. They're measured in parts per billion. Oil in parts per billion. The second is the toxicity is well within EPA limits, and the oxygen levels are also well within EPA limits. But that data is being shared transparently, and actually there's a good deal of cooperation going on between all of the parties involved here, and there'll be considerably more data coming in very soon, as the Admiral's already mentioned.
David Mattingly from CNN. Will the injection of this bridging material or the junk shot result in that plume diminishing or disappearing?
The purpose of using a bridging material, the junk shot, is to ensure that the mud we're injecting into the well goes down the wellbore as opposed to out to the end of the riser. So that's its purpose. I think it's going to be very, very difficult as you watch the activity take place to know the success just from the short-term pictures of the plume itself. What you saw yesterday, for instance, is that large amounts of the drilling mud came out the end of the riser. And actually, that's what obscured the visibility. It's the solids in the drilling mud. But ultimately, if the bridging material and the junk shot do their purpose, it will divert more of the mud down the wellbore so that it stops the flow and less of the fluid escapes out the end of the riser. That's its purpose.
Hi, Greg Bluestein, Associated Press. Earlier, Mr. Setters, earlier you said that there would be a 24-hour window when we know whether the operation worked. Is there a new timeline when you anticipate knowing whether the Topco worked? And secondly, what can you say about reports that too much of the drilling fluid was escaping from the top of the riser?
Yeah, on the first one, if you recall, I actually said 24 hours, or it may take longer based on operational requirements. And I'll stress that again. We might finish this in the next 24 hours, or it may take longer, because we're going to do the job as best we can. We're going to take the time it requires to do it, and if that takes more than 24 hours, then it'll take more than 24 hours. What we will do is continue to update you as we do the work, and I can assure you if we're successful in stopping the flow, once we're convinced that has occurred, you will all know quite quickly, probably from the roar that comes out of this building, I suspect. The second part of the question, actually the amount of fluid coming out of the riser in the visual observation, very, very difficult to interpret that. As I said, because the drilling mud has a lot of solid materials in it. That's what actually makes it a lot what you'd think of as almost sediment. That's what makes it heavy. And therefore, it makes it quite cloudy. And the currents down there, they're not strong, but they do move back and forth. So at times what they do is they flow back onto the remote vehicles, the robotic submarines with their cameras, and that's what obscures it. But to date, we think that the visual observations aren't showing any new leak points or leak sources at this point.
Louis Sahagan with the LA Times. I don't mean to belabor this, but yesterday you said that by this time today you would know whether it was successful or not. I'm wondering if you plan now to inject cement by the end of this evening, and in fact, at what point will you know? It sounds like it's become more difficult than perhaps you thought it would be yesterday.
I can appreciate why you'd think that, but actually with this type of operation, what we're trying to establish is make sure we get this heavy drilling mud to go down the wellbore so that it stops the flow of the well. And when we plan this job, we recognize that that could have difficulties because we have this riser going the opposite direction. So are we surprised that the job is taking this long? No, not particularly. Are we at any point saying we're finished with this operation? We're not doing that as well. The fact that it's taken more than 24 hours is not a big surprise. In fact, I think as many people have pointed out numerous times, some of the things we've done have taken longer than we thought, largely because it's hard to do things in 5,000 feet of water on the seabed. I can tell you one thing that's gone very well with the job so far is the equipment itself has performed according to plan, both the equipment on the surface and the equipment on the seabed. That element of the job has gone very well. But we'll stay at this until either we're successful or we've determined we can't be successful with this technique.
Last question. Can you put any kind of... Sorry, Ben Knuckles with AP again. Can you put any kind of likelihood on the prospect of doing the junk shot? Do you know how likely it is that you'll do it?
Actually, I wouldn't want to say that. What we've done at this point is working with people like the MMS, and Secretary Chu is actually in our operations center in Houston as part of this job as well. And when we go to the pumping phase, we turn over operational control to the experts in the field on the vessels who are doing the job. And they have a number of tools available to them, including materials they can pump from the surface or use the junk shot. That's been carefully analyzed today, and based on what they see occurring with the pumping pressures, they'll determine right then whether it's the appropriate next step. But that's all been very, very carefully analyzed with MMS and others, the best minds we can get to make sure it's the appropriate next step.
Operator, at this time, please open the line to callers.
Okay, your first question comes from Jessica Resnick with Bloomberg.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. Mr. Suttles, I'm curious. As I look at the process you described for us in terms of what happened last night with pausing, putting in the drilling mud so you could see what the effects were, when do you next expect to take a pause like that? Can you walk us through what you expect to do in the next 24 to 48 hours? Because obviously there were certain parts of the planned activities that I didn't understand as clearly as one might have liked to after yesterday's press conference.
Yeah, happy to do that. So what we'll be doing next is initiating the pumping operations, and I think that will actually occur quite soon. And as part of those pumping operations, we will use bridging material of some form as I've described. We will actually, while we're doing the pumping, what we're actually monitoring is the pressures. And those pressures tell us whether we think we're achieving the killing operation we're trying to do, whether we're actually inhibiting the flow from the well and how effective we are. At some point then in that operation, what you do is stop pumping and you monitor the well to see what the pressure does. If the pressure begins to rise, then you start pumping again or you think about your next step. If it doesn't rise, it's an indication that you're having success with the operation. We'll continue to do that as long as we think that we can be successful with the job. So we have a lot of capability offshore. We have 3 different vessels we can pump from. We have a large volume of mud, and we can replenish that at a regular basis. And we'll continue to do that as long as we believe this technique could be successful. And that could be done over the next 24 hours, or it could take longer. Once we believe we've stopped the flow with the pumping of mud, We'll follow that with cement, and that cement then should prevent the well from flowing again. And then after that, at some point, we'll cap this particular well with some device until such time as the relief well actually gets to the bottom hole location and we're able to pump cement into the wellbore at the bottom.